Good morning. It's April 12th, 2017, another April 12th. There are a few events in one's life where you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing on a certain date. For me, 9/11/01, September 11th, of course, is one of those days. And then, of course, April 8th to April the 12th and the days that followed in 2004. And that was the time period in which my mother was killed. And last week I did a show about how she died from what I believe it was medical malpractice. And so you can go back and watch that show. It was about informed consent. But today's show is about how her death affected and changed me and made me the person that I am today. And it definitely changed me. And first of all, you may notice I'm wearing lipstick today. I dressed pretty for my mom. But my mother was not a big person about makeup and eyeliner and eyeshadow and mascara, but my mother never left the house without lipstick. In fact, she put lipstick on every morning, whether she was leaving the house or not. That was her big thing. She had hundreds and hundreds of tubes of lipstick, and that's a really good memory. So when I wear lipstick, I think of my mother, and I don't wear it often because I end up doing it wrong and it stains my teeth or whatever, but I wanted to wear lipstick today for my mom. So, the funeral from hell and the whole experience of dealing with the death of my mother and basically dealing with it alone because I was her only child and her sole beneficiary. So I had to make all the arrangements. I had to deal with the Big Fat Greek family. And if you saw that show, The Big Fat Greek Wedding and The Big Fat Greek Wedding 2, you may think it's funny, but I cry because it's real. And this is not anything to bash the Greek Orthodox community, but it did affect the funeral. It affected a lot of things that it shouldn't have, because my wishes should have been respected as my mother's next of kin, as the person making the decisions. And I was not always respected, and that was a problem. It was a problem in the hospital. Several months before, actually a year before my mother's death, she had left the Greek Orthodox Church because the Greek Orthodox Church, because of their man-made rules, refused to acknowledge her marriage to her second husband, who she married in 2000. And they refused to acknowledge it because she did not pay them $600 and agree to get married in a Greek Orthodox wedding ceremony. She got married in her husband's church, a Christian church, which should have been fine. But it wasn't. And so because of that, she was refused Holy Communion at the Greek Orthodox Church. She was basically told she could come to the church and give money to the church. She just couldn't participate in communion or any other sacrament in the church unless she agreed to get married in the church. And my mother stood up for herself and refused to do that. And I was so proud of her because during her lifetime, my mother got walked over a lot. She was easily manipulated. She did things because she thought it was her duty to do them and because she should, not necessarily because she wanted to. My mother is one of those people that if you met her, you were better off for having met her. When she walked into a room, the room was better because she was in it. That's a real measure of a life. I've mentioned that many times on this show. But because of my mother's good nature and the way she was raised, she often got taken advantage of and manipulated. And I promised myself, especially after her death, that would never happen to me. Because after her death, I was manipulated. And I was disrespected. My home was disrespected. My wishes were disrespected. And it started in the hospital. My mother was in the ICU. And she was basically in a coma. She was not talking. She had a ventilator. She couldn't breathe on her own. They had a ventilator down her throat. She was not awake. But I had made it very clear to my family members that the Greek Orthodox priest was not welcome. And lo and behold, I leave to go to lunch and I come back and there is the Greek Orthodox priest standing over my mother in the ICU. And I lost it. Because one of my great aunts had called him. When my mother entered the hospital and they asked her religious affiliation, she put down her husband's church. Not Greek Orthodox. So the only way that this priest knew she was in the hospital was because somebody called him, against my wishes specifically. And I have a wonderful cousin, and she knows who she is, Mary. You know how much I have loved you my whole life. And she calmed me down. She said, look, he's not doing anything. You know, the aunts wanted him here. Let him do his thing and just walk away. You don't have to see him. I'm like, okay, whatever. But see, there was another problem. Okay, that was a problem in itself. But then I have this really crazy great aunt. And I mean, she is certifiably crazy. She believes herself to be a seer. She has dreams. She likes to come to hospitals and disrupt the hospital. She likes to pray over people and, oh, sweet Jesus, oh, you know. And I said, I don't want her near my mother. And that was a problem because she didn't take nicely to that. And so again, I stepped out for a bite to eat. I come back with my husband and my best friend, who I call my sister. And this woman is causing a scene because I had told the nursing staff I did not want her to see my mother. And she starts screaming at the top of her lungs in the ICU in front of all the other patients, their families, and the staff. You're a whore! This is a whore! She stole her mother's house! In front of strangers. Now look, people say I should forgive that because she's old. Well, you know what? If she had taken me into a private room and called me a whore to my face in private, maybe. If she had called me a bitch in front of all of these people, well, I am a bitch. That might have been forgivable. But to scream out loud to an entire hospital wing that I am a whore and that I stole my mother's house when this is actually my house. I was born in this house. I grew up in this house. I lived in this house my entire life. When my mother got married and left this house, of course, it was my house. She gave it to me. That's the way things work in families. So that was very unforgivable. So I basically told the staff, I said, look, she's nuts. And they knew that because she had caused scenes before in the last couple of days. So I said, if she comes back, you call security or you call the police because I'm not dealing with this shit. My mother is probably dying and I didn't need that shit. I didn't need the Greek priest my mother hated. And by the way, you know what that priest did after my stepfather died? He went to my mother's house, sat at her kitchen table and said, well, now your husband's dead. You can now come back to the Greek church and take communion and have all your rights restored. And she said, would you please leave my house? I was so proud of her that day. So yeah, I don't really think she would have appreciated having him praying over her body while she was dying. But that decision was taken away from me. My choices were not respected. And that pissed me off. And I started changing. I'm going to show you how what happened those 4 days in April and at the funeral made me who I am today, because I was a very different person back then. You would not have recognized me as the political Paula you know today. I was very different. But this changes you. So, when my mother died, in the tradition of a lot of families, and especially in our family, the person who is the next of kin of the deceased, they get like 50 people running to their house that evening, bringing food that doesn't fit in the refrigerator, and that's just what we always do. So you got to run home after somebody dies and clean your house and get ready for the barrage. And I did not want this crazy old woman to come to my house that night. Okay? I did not want that. But, damn, they got me. Some family members sat me down and said, you know, she loved your mother so much and your mother loved her and she really should be here. And I caved. I said, okay. But I'm not going. She didn't drive. I said, no one from my circle, my sister, my best friend is not going to pick her up. My husband's not going to pick her up. You want her here, you get her here. Well, there's a lot of people here, and I noticed that, and you dog lovers out here, you're going to love this. You dog lovers are going to really love this. I had my dog Brindle at the time, and she was a lovely dog. And she liked to hang around under the dining room table, and my aunt was sitting at the dining room table, and I noticed she had a rolled up newspaper in her hand. Now, this is in my house. And my dog, who loved my mother, she called my mother Yaya. And my mother loved that dog. And my aunt comes to my home, my husband's and my home, and disrespects our home by bringing a rolled up newspaper and is slamming it at my dog. Anytime my dog is even walking around her leg, not doing anything to her, she's under the table, and she's swatting with the newspaper. And I went nuts. Nuts. And I said, get that woman the hell out of my house. I told my two good friends, get the dog, take her upstairs to the bedroom and stay with her. She's been traumatized. She lost her Yaya today, and now this woman is beating her for no reason. We never beat our dog with a newspaper. And she came prepared. She came to purposely beat my dog with a newspaper because she doesn't like dogs. Now, here's the thing. What would you all say? If you know this woman, this young woman who just lost her mother very suddenly, has a dog and you don't like dogs, then maybe you don't come to the house. But see, all she wanted was to sit on a throne and act like she was my mother's mother, which she was not. My mother did love her, and she treated her very well. She gave her money because she was very poor. She gave her hundreds of dollars a year. She would pick her up and take her places. And this is how this woman repaid my mother for all her generosity. By swatting her granddog with a newspaper, disrespecting her daughter, calling me a whore in front of strangers, outsiders, and then coming into my husband's and my home and disrespecting our home and our dog. And I was supposed to forgive that because she's old. I'm sorry. I know a lot of old people who would never dream of doing something so horrific, especially to someone they claim to love and someone that has just lost their mother very suddenly, very unexpectedly. So yes, I threw her out of my house. And I did have a few people who did stand up for me. And I will mention them at the end of this show. They were important, and they have stood up for me ever since. But now we have to get to the funeral, because the funeral was fun too. See, this crazy woman also thought she wasn't going to know when the funeral was, so she kept calling the funeral home and embarrassing us there. When is Christina Kling's funeral? They're not going to tell me. So my husband had to get involved. He had to call her and say, look, this is about Christina, this funeral, not you. We don't want any histrionics. This woman has a habit of fainting at funerals and causing scenes at funerals and making the funeral all about her and not about the deceased and their loved ones, like me, the next of kin. So he said, we will certainly tell you when the funeral is. We don't know yet. But you need to stop calling them. You are embarrassing us. And by the way, you will behave yourself at this funeral. And because my husband can be very persuasive, the call stopped. But the night of the viewing, once again, something else happened. And I was, again, I thought disrespected. Because I'm sitting there and people that I loved, people who came there to support me, my good friends, well, they were pushed aside because my great aunts were constantly bringing people from the Greek church. This is so-and-so. She was in choir with your mother. This is so-and-so. I'm like, you know what? Where were these people when my mother was being excommunicated from a church she loved? Where were these people standing up to the priest when he said she could not take communion in a church she served for over 60 years as organist? And now they want to come cry over her dead body, and I'm supposed to kick my dear friends who support me to the curb to be nice to them? No, I'm sorry. I mean, my God. And then, piece de resistance, and this was something that changed everything. The Greek priest walks into my mother's viewing. He wants to cry over her dead carcass. And my great aunts go apeshit. Oh, Father! Father, can you believe it? Thank God you're here, Father. Like all is right and my mother's going to be raised from the dead because this Greek priest showed up. And I was just sitting in my seat with my husband next to me, and I'm like, oh my God. I will be quiet, but he better not dare come over to me, and he better not dare try to hug me. And what did that son of a bitch do? He tried to hug me. And that was it. And I was very quiet. And I stuck my hand out and I said, I appreciate you coming, but the Greek church broke my mother's heart. And this was in my mother's viewing, maybe 5 feet from her body. And I am the daughter. I am the bereaved. And he stands up his full height. Now, just no, wait a minute. And he's going to actually argue with me. The deceased next of kin, her daughter, in front of her body, when I'm absolutely right. And then I saw my 6'2" husband stand up. And he's like, sir, you're leaving. And everybody lost their minds. All the Greek family members behind me were like, oh my God, Jason is throwing the Greek priest out of the viewing. And he did. He said, sir, this way, please. And the priest couldn't believe it. And my family lost their minds. They thought, oh my God, how could she do such a thing? But guess who didn't lose their minds? Guess how much respect my husband and I got from some people in the Greek church? A lot. A very prestigious lawyer that went to the Greek church and knew my mother for years came up to Jason at the viewing, said, I need to shake your hand, young man. You got balls. Good for you. See, nobody liked this priest because, see, he's one of those kind of priests that he forgets that he's a messenger from God, not God himself. He thought he was God. And people were afraid of him, afraid to stand up to him. My mother stood up to him when she threw him out of her house, when he dared to say now that her husband was dead, good news, you can come back to the Greek church. My mother threw him out of her house. My husband threw him out of my mother's viewing. I think it was quite appropriate. And my husband didn't make a scene. My husband didn't yell. The priest made a scene. When at the top of his voice, he said, now just no, wait a minute. And he's going to argue with me. You know what he should have said? I'm sorry you feel like that, Paula. And if you would like to speak with me, I will be happy to speak with you at a more appropriate time. I will leave now. You have my sympathies. Would have been great if he could have done that. But no, he had to make the last word. Well, guess who had the last word? My wonderful husband, and I'll never forget this either. You talk about not forgetting things. My husband escorted him out, and my husband came back and sat down next to me. He took my hand. He put his arm around me. He said, nobody messes with my girl. And that has been my mantra ever since. You don't fuck with me because I fuck back. You don't mess with me because I'll mess back. I was so proud of my husband that day, and my mother would have been very proud of him as well. My mother loved him like a son. I have only seen my husband cry like a baby once, and that was when my mother died. He bawled. He loved my mother. My mother loved him. She called him her son. And the last gift that my husband could give to her was to make sure that her wishes were adhered to, about not wanting that Greek priest anywhere near her and her dead body. So I think my mother would have been very proud, and I don't care if some people in the Greek community thought I made a mistake or that some of my family members were embarrassed. That's up to them. They look in their mirrors every morning. I look in mine. And I'm very proud of what I see in my mirror every single morning. And my priorities are very, very well scripted to me. My priorities are my husband, my now dog Savvy. Brindle passed away and went to be with her Yaya in heaven in 2009. And when she passed away, when Brindle was dying, I told her to go find Yaya across the Rainbow Bridge. And she's with Yaya. And nobody is hitting her with a newspaper. No crazy old women are beating her with a newspaper. She's with her Yaya now, safe. But my priorities are very clear. My husband, my dog, and myself. And that sounds selfish. And I am selfish, and I'm a bitch. I wear that badge proudly. Because I need to look out for me because nobody else will. My husband will. But I need to make sure that people don't take advantage of me. Like when the crazy woman told everybody at the funeral that I'm a millionaire now because my mother is dead, that I somehow inherited millions of dollars. And, oh, I was going to probably buy a mansion now in the suburbs. Well, welcome to my home. The same home I grew up in, the same home my mother willingly gave to me in 2000. I didn't steal it. And I certainly never got paid for sex, so I'm not a whore either. Just so you know. I enjoy sex, but I'm not a whore. I am married. I enjoy sex with my husband. That does not make me a whore. And I have never stolen anything from my mother or from anybody. So there you go. Just to make that clear. And it is nice to smile and laugh about some of this stuff now. It wasn't funny at the time. And there are people I still don't speak to this day. I found out recently that this old crazy woman who is now in a nursing home wanted to see me. And I said, no, thanks. No, thanks. See, they say sometimes that forgiveness is good for you. See, that kind of forgiveness would be bad for me. That woman doesn't deserve one more minute of my time or my thoughts. Talking about her today is really giving her too much credit. But it was an important part of this funeral from hell. So, yeah. No, I will not be going to visit. And people say to me sometimes, well, if she dies, are you going to the funeral? I said, the only reason I would go to that woman's funeral is to make sure she was really dead. I know, it sounds awful. But again, I'm a bitch. I'm a whore. What am I going to do? At the viewing, by the way, this old woman said to me, oh, I wish it had been me who died instead of Christina. And I looked her right in the face and I said, I do too. I really wish it had been you. Because you bring no joy to anyone, and my mother brought joy everywhere she went. Nobody ever met my mother and didn't find themselves better off for having done so. My mother was a positive person. She was a very passive person. She didn't like to argue. She walked away from fights. If she, you could get her mad, but she was not someone who would go out looking for a fight, and she would never purposely harm anyone. And that's why for most of her life, she was taken advantage of. She was forced to do things that she probably would have chosen not to do. But she did them out of duty and out of love and out of respect. And I wish people had respected her just a little bit more. And that's one thing that I always say too. You do not have to love me. You don't have to like me. But you will for damn sure respect me. And I demand that from businesses I deal with. I demand that from my friends. I demand it from my family members. And if you do not respect me, then you're out. Period. I have no problem excommunicating with people, putting people out of my life who I don't feel respect me. And again, I don't need the love and the flowers and the hearts and the roses and how are you and oh, we love you so much, you're so wonderful, but I need respect. I respect myself. And I demand that others do so as well, or I don't need you in my life. That's what I learned in that horrible, cruel April of 2004. And it is how I have lived my life every day since. I've had some relapses where I think I've been taken advantage of and I've allowed it to happen, and I get very angry with myself and I don't let it happen again. It's hard to say no to somebody and mean it. But it's a lot worse when you say yes to somebody and are sorry for it later. So just another lesson from that cruel and awful April in 2004. And the other thing, I do have to thank a few people. And they may not like being included in this video because, again, I did kind of air some dirty laundry. But, I mean, it's okay. It really happened. So, come on. And we're all friends here. But I do want to thank, sadly this woman has passed away, my godmother, Arlene. She was amazing. She was with me in the hospital while Mom was dying, and she was at the house, and she helped clean the house. And Kathy and Tara, my godsister Tara, my cousin Kathy. And after Mom died, I used to talk to Mom every day, and Kathy would call me every single day because she knew that I was used to talking to my mom every day, and I would want somebody to talk to. So every single day, I spoke with Kathy, and that was lovely. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Tara, and you guys cleaned the house, and this house was no pleasure to clean. Believe me, it was a mess. And you cleaned it so everybody could invade with their food and their condolences. So thank you. And, of course, Mary, you know I have loved you since the day I was born. I mean, you have been a part of my life for everything, and you stood up for me, by the way, when Aunt Mary was asked to leave the house after she beat the dog, and you stood up for me. And I remember you saying, I am on your side. When I said, is anybody here on my side? And you yelled up to me because I was going upstairs. I was done. You said, I have always been on your side. And Mary, I will never forget that. It means a lot because I believe that you are on my side. And I love that about you, and you know how much I love you. And I also want to thank, and this is going to sound strange coming from me the way my mother died, but I want to thank Dr. Jackie Evans. Now, I have been very careful not to mention certain doctors, but Jackie Evans is one of the good ones. And I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to tell you why because I think she still practices. I know that a few years ago she treated a friend of mine's mother who had ovarian cancer, and I recommended Dr. Evans to them because she was so wonderful to my mother. She cried with me when she told me my mother had died. It was the first patient that Dr. Evans had ever lost after surgery. Now, she's lost patients to cancer. She is a cancer doctor. My mother didn't have cancer. But Jackie cried with me. Jackie would call me at 10 o'clock in the morning saying, I just talked to somebody in Chicago. I'm trying to find out what to do to save your mother because I don't know. She couldn't figure out what was going on. But I will tell you who never came back was that hernia doctor. Remember the one I told you about that never met my mother? Because the one who didn't show up that day. I never spoke to this woman again. She didn't come to the funeral. Dr. Evans came to the funeral. In fact, Dr. Evans was the only doctor that treated my mother who showed up at her funeral. God, did I appreciate that? Did I not so appreciate that? She sent me a Christmas card every year for many, many years, and then I stopped sending Christmas cards, so I guess she figured, well, but in 2006, this is how wonderful this doctor is. I had a cancer scare. I had a bad pap smear, which I've told you about, and the first person I called was her office, and I didn't think she would bother to call me back. An hour later, she's on the phone with me. She knew who I was. She gave me some wonderful advice. She said, first of all, this is probably a lab mistake. It happens a lot. She said, of course, quit smoking. That was her mantra. She's not a big thing on smoking. But she said, look, get a second opinion. Don't just run into surgeries or biopsies or anything like that. She said, wait the 6 months, have the other, you're going to be fine. And she was right. But who does that? What doctors do that? I was never her patient. But all I had to do 2 years later was call her office and say, this is Christina Kling's daughter, and I need Jackie's help. And she was on the phone within an hour. How lovely is that? How lovely that my mother's own family doctor, the one who had refused a hysterectomy for 25 years and put my mother in this position to be killed, he didn't show up at her funeral. The hernia doctor certainly didn't come anywhere near us. But Jackie Evans showed up. Jackie Evans, after the one exploratory surgery when Mom was not doing well, came out to me and she said, look, I checked my sutures. I did, my work is done. She said the hysterectomy was a success. There is nothing wrong with what I did. And I actually believe that Jackie Evans is the kind of doctor that if she had done something wrong, she would have told me. Because she's a stand-up woman. And she loves her patients. And again, she is the only doctor that treated my mother who shed a tear for my mother. And who showed up at her funeral. And I respect that. That is respect. And if ever I get into trouble with my reproductive organs, Jackie Evans will be the first doctor that I call. I hope she is still practicing. I've actually tried to find her on Facebook to thank her again for everything she did for my mother and for me. She probably saved my life too when I called her in 2006. So, good person, good doctor. If you ever need help, you ladies out there, you call Jackie Evans if you're in Lancaster. She's the best. And again, you know, this has been a rough show. It's a long show, so it might take a while to upload, so I better shut up. But I did want to say that you don't want to wallow in grief. It's been 13 years. And a friend of mine recently lost her mother. And I said, look, it's going to get less intense, but it's always going to be there. It's going to be like a little, oh, am I getting a headache? But it's not every day. And there are days now where I actually don't think about my mom. And that's not a bad thing. One year I didn't remember it was her birthday. on September 18th because I was out jet skiing. I was having a really nice day. And that's a good thing. That's what my mom would want. My mom would not want me to die with her. She would want me to live. And she would be so proud of how much Jason and I have accomplished in these past 13 years since she last saw us. And I think she would be proud of the person that I've become because of all the things that happened in that very cruel, cruel month of April in 2004. I love you, Mom. I love you so much. You know, we had our fights, and I will remember the good times and the bad times. But for today, I'm going to dwell on the good times, the fun stuff that happened before April 8th and April 12th, 2004. All those fun moments, all those fun times, all the laughs we had at your expense, and you laughed with us. When you're trying to cook oatmeal and you're burning it. Just fun stuff, fun memories. That's what today is about. So, for now. And of course, all of you, how much I love you. Love shows and grows, and every day, I think my heart has grown 10 sizes since I started doing this show, because I feel all of your love. I love the people who disagree with me, and I love the people who agree with me. Of course, I love you people who agree with me a lot more. You're my favorites. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Again, we want to smile today and laugh a little. My mom laughed a lot, even when she wanted to cry inside, or she always she was always laughing and smiling. That's how people remember her, and that's how I'm going to remember her. So, I love all of you guys, and please tell your loved ones that you love them. Let them know. Life is so short. None of us knows what the next hour is going to bring. So share your love. If you love somebody, let them know. So, I love you guys. And I will see you tomorrow, and we are going to get back to business tomorrow. A viewer shared some information, new information about HIPAA, which we talked about last week. So I'm going to look into that. And also there's an update on the airline thing that happened. And United Airlines has really changed their tune. So we will get into all of that tomorrow. And I love you. Have a great day. Share your love with somebody. Believe me, they need it. And they will appreciate it. Political Paula is out. And I love you, Mom.